right through the middle of London runs the Thames. This mighty tidal river was once the artery of the city, but now all the bridges seem to sew the whole place together, linking the north with the south.
Powerful and functional, graceful, sleek and slender, artistic and colourful, we've got innovative and modern bridges beside the grandeur of Gothic design and Victorian ingenuity. And an important part of London's social and economic progress can be measured by its very first bridge, London Bridge, which has existed in 4 very different incarnations that date back to medieval and even Roman times.
I've just come down Fish Street Hill, and this is Lower Thames Street. And underneath my feet are the remains of the Roman bridge, the very end of the Roman bridge on the north bank. Of course, we're now about 100 metres away from the river, because in those days it was very much wider, with sloping, muddy banks.
Ali Taylor from the Thames Explorer Trust helps schoolchildren discover London's history on the banks of the Thames.
Romans built the first London Bridge, yes?
They did,
and it's just downstream here.
Yep.
How did they choose where to build it?
Well, one of the reasons was this was the highest point that the tide reached in those days. And so they got a free lift with the tide up the river.
Right.
Another reason they built it here was because it doesn't look like it now, but this area was full of islands and it was very shallow, and so they could build a bridge across. So it was a good bridging point, good fording point.
Is there any evidence of it here on the bank of the river?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, we had a bit of a star find. And these were the children, because the children are wonderful at finding
They've got sharp
things.
eyes, haven't they?
They have indeed. Now, those are Roman floor tiles.
They're amazing that they haven't knocked off in all that time. It's at least 1,500 years old, isn't
Well,
it?
what happens is, you see, they're buried in the mud.
Okay, and again, then they get protected.
And this is a fantastic archaeological site because you've got the tide coming in and out. So twice a day, the River Thames kindly does the excavation work.
Right.
So if we came down here next week, we'd find something totally
else.
different.
Gotcha.
So that's why it's always really exciting to come down here, because you never know what you're going to find.
No one knows quite what happened to the Roman London Bridge. Some historians think it fell into disrepair after the Romans left. Others believe its wooden construction was patched up and used right up until the building of London's very first stone bridge in 1176.
This is the church of St Magnus the Martyr, and just through there is what used to be Bridge Street, the approach to the old London Bridge. Come and have a look. These lumps of stone were actually part of the old London Bridge. Bridge Street was here, this was the end of the bridge, and it went straight across the river there. Oh, they seem to have built something in the way. Still, I'm told there's a lovely model of the bridge inside the church. And here it is, just look at this. What amazes me is all the buildings on the bridge. There are 3-storey houses, there are shops down below, there's a chapel, the Thomas à Becket Chapel, there's a gatehouse here, there are pigs in the street, and lots of chaps on horses and cows here as well. Here's a bit of naked bridge, but mostly it's covered in buildings. Now, in the old days, before this, they could put a single arch over a stream, but here this is 276 metres long, and they had to have, look, 19 arches. Absolutely extraordinary, arch after arch, and they're incredibly narrow too. Just look at this one here. Hello. You can see it'd be quite tough to get a boat through there, it's so narrow. And in fact, if the tide was unfavourable, there could be a 6-foot drop from your side upstream to my side, so that you'd shoot through at tremendous speed. It was called shooting the bridge, and the watermen loved it, but it was dangerous. A lot of them died. And a proverb came which said, the bridge was for wise men to cross over and for fools to go under. One reason that they built all those houses and shops on London Bridge was that they always needed money. The fact is, the bridge was always in need of maintenance and repair.
London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady.
The fair lady in the rhyme could well have been Eleanor of Provence, Henry III's queen. She misspent funds meant for maintenance of the bridge. In 1282, 5 arches collapsed and she quickly returned responsibility for the maintenance to her subjects.
Wash away, my fair lady.
Amazingly, the bridge was maintained for almost 200 years. But after another fatal collapse in 1437, something more serious had to be done.
Over the next 35 years, arch by arch, London Bridge was rebuilt, but it still needed constant repair. Its collapse could have been a disaster for the capital, as the nearest crossing was 20 miles upriver in Kingston. Fishmongers' Hall on London Bridge Approach is home to one of the City of London's guilds or livery companies that were formed in early medieval times to protect and regulate specific trades.
Here inside Fishmongers' Hall, with its wonderfully rich decoration, they've got a whole mass of information about the history of London Bridge. And I'm off to meet the curator, Claire Crawford, in the courtroom. So, Claire, this must be the old London Bridge with all the buildings on it.
Yes, it is. The buildings were taken off in 1757. They caused a sort of impediment to the traffic flowing over London Bridge.
They did. It wouldn't be easy to drive anything over there, would it?
That's right. And there were shops and all sorts of businesses. It became apparent in 1820 that the city were going to have to look at building a new bridge. They held an architectural competition in 1825, but decided after they picked a winner that they were going to ask John Rennie to design the bridge anyway, because he had designed Waterloo and Southwark bridges.
Right.
And so John Rennie's design was put up.
This looks a bit of a mess, this picture. What's going on?
Well, it does look like rather an unusual topic for a painting, doesn't it? But it does actually show the demolition of the old London Bridge that started in 1832.
Ah, so this is the remains of it?
That is, yes, that's right.
Wow.
And you can see how the approach to that bridge went past the door of St Magnus the Martyr Church. This looks to our eyes, as I say, an unusual topic, but the fact is that 5,000 people a day came to see the bridge being demolished.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they sell tickets?
They should have done, I think.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm sure a few of them took the odd piece of stone home and put it in their pockets as a souvenir.
The demolition of the medieval London Bridge had sparked an awareness of its historical value, and all sorts of little trinkets, egg cups and snuff boxes were made out of fragments of the bridge's stone and timbers.
Curiously, the finest artefact of all from the old London Bridge is this chair. It's not terribly comfortable, I have to say, because I'm sitting on a piece of stone. Claire, tell me about it. You allege that all these timbers came from old London Bridge, but they're not covered in barnacles or seaweed or anything.
No, these were very large old timbers, some of them driven into the riverbed. They were taken out, preserved, dried out, and then the inner parts of the wood were used to make the chair that you can see here. We've got here the old London Bridge with its 19 small arches there.
Only a very small boat would fit through the middle there.
And then the second one down here is the second London Bridge that was designed by John Rennie. And then further down you've got Waterloo and Southwark bridges, both of which were also designed by John Rennie.
So the old bridge that we're interested in is this one of Rennie's.
That's right.
On its completion in 1831, John Rennie was knighted, and his magnificent London Bridge still stands to this day. But as you can see, this London Bridge here is definitely not Rennie's 5-arch design. So where has it got to? Well, it can be found in the unlikely home of Lake Havasu in the Arizona desert. Sold in the 1960s, it's rumoured that the purchasers, the McCulloch Oil Company, thought they were actually buying Tower Bridge. Bridging nothing except desert sand when it was first reconstructed brick by brick, it now forms the centrepiece of this man-made fishing lake and is a major tourist attraction.
You don't have to go all the way to Arizona to see Rennie's London Bridge, because this is one of the original arches, the one on the south bank. And also part of his structure are these steps taking you up onto the bridge. They're now called Nancy's Steps because in the Dickens novel Oliver Twist, this is where Nancy gets murdered.
Not much, however, of the old medieval London Bridge remains. You can see two of its alcoves preserved in Victoria Park, and another a little closer to its original home here in the grounds of Guy's Hospital. But my favourite piece of the medieval London Bridge is far more colourful and vibrant than these old stones.
And it's here, just round the corner in Newcomen Street, this fabulous coat of arms. You see at the top it says King's Arms 1890, that's when this pub was rebuilt, but underneath it says George III 1760. That was the year that George III came to the throne. In fact, that coat of arms was on the south gate of London Bridge in the time of his dad, George II. And it was in 1760, the whole lot was demolished, all the houses, the south gate and everything, and sold, and that's why it landed up on this pub. But when the bridge was there with the arch, everyone who crossed the bridge must have walked under that arch and indeed under that coat of arms. And I think I ought to do it too, just in remembrance. There's no bridge there, but there might be a bar, mightn't there?
For hundreds of years, the only bridge to cross the Thames in London itself was London Bridge. If you wanted to cross anywhere else, you would have to be ferried over by a waterman. At the time, this business was at least as important as the taxi business is today.
But there's one ferry that still crosses the tidal Thames in the same place as it has for hundreds of years, right here in Twickenham. Right, Francis, can you take me across?
I can, yep.
Do you get a lot of business here?
Yes, weekends mainly.
So it's tourists?
Tourists and residents, I would say.
Right, but not commuters with briefcases?
No.
None of
We
that.
only start at gentlemen's times. That's 10 in the morning till 6.
So why don't they bother to go to the bridges?
Well, Richmond Bridge, from the steps round, is 1¼ miles.
That way?
That way.
Yes.
And Teddington Lock, to your right, is 1¾ miles. That's a footbridge over the lock.
So that's a longish way, a longish walk?
It is.
It's what's more, it's a rather uncomfortable footbridge, isn't it? It's sort of steep.
Yes,
yeah.
very steep. Yeah.
Yes.
Many years ago, I believe all the residents of Richmond Hill,
That's not there, yes?
that's up there, got a covenant to say that the view from Richmond Hill to the source of the river mustn't be obscure.
So they said no bridges,
No bridges, nothing.
and therefore there's still a ferry running.
Yeah.
That, of course, was not to be the fate for the rest of London's watermen. I steadied my sea legs again for a ride a few miles downstream. The expansion of the capital and the ever-growing congestion on London Bridge finally got work underway on London's first new bridge over the Thames in nearly 700 years.
The Corporation of London held back the building of Westminster Bridge for 70 years for fears of the damage it would do to the trade in Southwark, and also because they were worried about impoverishing the ferrymen. They even bribed the King, Charles II, to oppose the building plans.
The first Westminster Bridge that opened in 1750 was dubbed the Bridge of Fools. Corners were cut in its construction, and its cheap, shallow foundation suffered from constant subsidence. Several of the piers had to be rebuilt before it was finally demolished in 1862 and completely rebuilt as the bridge that stands today. The construction of that first Westminster Bridge, despite all its faults, meant that holding back the demand for more bridges across the Thames became impossible.
The grandest and most famous bridge in the whole of London is a monstrous Victorian original built right next to the Tower of London. It's Tower Bridge.
It's also one of the newest, completed in 1894. It was financed by the tolls and taxes levied on London Bridge, and it cost more than £1 million. It was arguably the most ambitious civil engineering project at the time. over 400 men were employed to build the structure, and over 70,000 tonnes of concrete were used to build the bridge's supporting piers alone.
Today, thousands of tourists come here just to look at this fabulous structure. But back in 1876, just the idea of building a bridge here wasn't at all popular. Now, the City of London were desperate to ease the traffic flow around the city, which is just the other side of the Tower of London. But the Thames was a major shipping lane, and a bridge here might spell the end of the upstream docks.
So how would the bigger ships reach the docks further upstream? Many designs were put forward with various clever ideas for letting the ships through. Eventually, it was Horace Jones's ingenious drawbridge design that was chosen. It lifted the whole road.
Now look, they're opening the bridge. It's up at nearly 45 degrees. There's a boat coming down. So they've shut off the traffic, they've shut off the pedestrians, and they're all gathered here. In the old days, Port of London was the busiest port in the world, and they kept having to lift the bridge several times a day. So the pedestrians were allowed to go up in lifts up the towers and walk across the high walkways at the top so they wouldn't be interrupted. But in fact, nobody bothered to go because it was such fun standing here watching the bridge go up. They all just stayed here as spectators, more or less as they are today.
The bridge lift these days involves simply pressing a sequence of buttons, engaging the hydraulic pumps that power the bridge, stopping the traffic, and releasing the safety bolts that keep the bridge in place. David, who was in charge of opening the bridge, was kind enough to let me have a go at the final stage of lifting.
So how are we doing? What else has to happen?
Right, it's now protected, so now we're ready to do a lift.
Really? Can I do
Now
it?
we're ready to do a lift. All we do is check and make sure the bridge is clear of everybody.
Right.
And now you can go ahead.
You don't have to warn anybody? You just do it?
We just do the lift now.
And hold it down?
You just pull back and hold it back. If you watch the screen,
Oh, fantastic.
the screen will actually go with it.
Oh,
Show
yes.
you how you're moving.
Oh, wow. Hey, this is something I always wanted to do.
Now.
Open Tower Bridge. 45 is a long way up.
It actually goes up to 87 degrees.
Gosh. Oh, the pigeons are getting all unhappy up there. We're disturbing their
We
resting
don't like
places.
pigeons up there.
Oh, here comes the barge. Right, so then I just
Okay, yes.
let go.
That's it. This will come to rest.
Now, this chap here was the chap who used to drive the bridge in Victorian times. In fact, I think he's been doing it ever since, but he's not looking terribly well at the moment. They didn't have green electric buttons in those days. They had these vast levers. The first two levers here are for the large and small engines. It says large and small. You could decide which engines you wanted to drive. This is for the resting blocks, the brake. You had to operate each of these in turn, and more brake, and finally the pawl, and each one had to be over like that before you could begin to open the bridge. And then when you shut it again, you did that. And when you were going to open the bridge, you did it with this, which is basically just to open the hydraulic valve down below and let in originally the water, and today it would be the oil. Now I'm right down in the bowels of the building, below water level, and this is an accumulator. The way the Victorians did it was to generate, using a steam engine at the end of the bridge, high pressure water at 750 pounds per square inch, which came in here in pipes. But they couldn't make it fast enough to lift the bridge directly, so they had to accumulate the energy. And what they did was to pump that high pressure water into a cylinder in the middle of this. And the water pushed the piston up, which lifted this crosshead and lifted the whole of this vast weight. And it went up the rails, you see there are guide rails in the walls, up about 20 feet. And then they had accumulated a mass of energy. And with 6 of these accumulators, they had plenty of power to lift the whole bridge.
Despite switching to electricity in 1976, the basic Victorian engineering principles that power Tower Bridge remain the same today as they were over 100 years ago. I was taken further into the depths of the bridge to see the bascule chamber that was built to accommodate the bridge's counterweight as it opened.
It's moving. It's moving. Are you sure it can't just break loose and go whoop?
It cannot break loose, no. All systems fail, it just locks up solid wherever it is.
Now, as much as the crew and I knew this was true, there is still something decidedly uncomfortable about having hundreds of tons of lead and iron bearing down on you.
You can see the sky through there, well, almost.
Yeah.
That is one whole lot of machinery, isn't it?
Each end of the bridge weighs 1,200 tons, but they're relatively easy to lift because the counterweights coming toward me in the bascule chamber act in the same way as the kid at the other end of a seesaw.
I just hope he's right and that it is going to stop quite soon. Ah, it's stopped.
Or broken.
Broken. I don't believe you could break this bridge.
Though only a short ride downstream from its nearest rival, London Bridge, Tower Bridge stands as a reminder of London's seafaring heritage of the not-too-distant past and marks our progress as we build yet bigger and bolder bridges even further towards the sea.
This is the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge. It carries the traffic on the M25 from Thurrock across to Dartford. This was finished in 1991 and it's actually 2 miles long and the closest bridge to the sea.
As American President Franklin Roosevelt once said, there can be little doubt that in many ways the story of bridge building is the story of civilization. For by it we can measure an important part of a people's progress. And today the bridges tie together the whole of London, linking the north and south marshlands of Roman and medieval times into what has become the modern world city that London is today.